Love has been the defining theme of my life, and also forgetting to turn things on. The defining theme of my life. And when I say love, I'm speaking of a multifaceted experience. I'm speaking about familial love, as I come from a big, tightly knit Southern family who expresses their love for one another both openly and often. And no matter how different I have become, no matter how much my politics or religion has changed, I'm blessed that our love for one another hasn't. And in this notion of family, I also include those friends that have been with me for so long or saw me through trials so deep that I can only think of them as family now. Those friends that I call my chosen family. I would go as far to say that it has been this wide net of family and their love for me that has constituted my very spirit, knitting me into the man that I am today. That my life has been defined by love, it's not just familial love. I'm also speaking about love for that transcending mystery and wonder that we talk about. Love for this thing that I call God. This thing/not thing that I was first introduced to as a child, but became a very lived and personal reality for me after a spiritual experience in my early 20s. This experience and the relationship that followed forms the very bedrock of my life, the source of my solace, and the guiding compass of my highest callings. Amongst these callings has been the call to give folks back to themselves. It is this call, this love for the world, that has guided my deepest vocational aspirations. It is love for this world that drew me to the work that I did in Florida, working with recovering addicts and alcoholics. And it is the same love for the world that brings me into the work that I share with you in this faith community. So as I look back, I can clearly see that my life has been defined by love. But recently, very recently, I noticed something was missing from my litany of love. Myself. See, somewhere along the lines, I was taught that in order to be a good person, that you had to set aside your own needs and desires. That to be a good friend or worker, partner, family member, that you had to put the other person first and yourself second. I learned that somehow loving yourself takes away from your capacity to love another. In short, I learned that self-love was selfish. However, I've come to believe a very different thing about self-love. I've come to believe that self-love is not selfishness, but paradoxically is the absence of selfishness. Selfishness being that thing that we do when we don't love ourselves, where we seek to take and take and take from the people and the world around us to help us cope with this hole inside of our chest, to help us cope with our inability to love ourselves. No, self-love is the radical act of looking at ourselves as is, accepting ourselves as is, and knowing that we are already who we are meant to be. Knowing that if there is some part of ourselves that hasn't shown up yet, it isn't a mistake. It isn't an indication of lack of worth or character or effort. No, if there's some truly glorious part of ourselves that hasn't shown up yet, it's simply because the time has not yet come. The time has not yet come where we are both ready and equipped to step into that next grandest version of ourselves. Because self-love is hard, y'all. It is hard as it is great, but I believe it's worth it. Further, I have come to believe that it is the single most important thing that we can do to support our health, spiritual development, and justice making. In terms of our health, self-love, it asks us to go to the doctor when we're sick. It encourages us to take a nap when we're worn out. It allows the tears to flow when we have lost something or someone important to us. In short, self-love is the very mechanism that keeps us alive, both physically and emotionally. It is synonymous with self-care. As for spiritual development, the theological belief that I hold most deeply is that life meets you where you are. Because my spiritual development hasn't happened when I'm trying to be something other than what I am, trying to be what I think I should be. Instead, it's been when I've accepted who I am and dared to let that be seen by myself, by another, and by spirit. And to the degree that I have allowed myself to be seen is to the degree that I've been able to step into that next grandest version of myself on this journey of spiritual development. And maybe most radically, I see self-love as an essential component in justice making. In this, let me start by saying that for me, justice is simply an acknowledgement and making so of what is already true. That every human being has inherent worth and dignity, not regardless of, but because of our differences. That said, I believe that all of the isms and supremacies and tyrannies of this world have one thing in common, that they prey on our sense of self-worth, esteem, and value. Whether we are part of an oppressed community or the dominant culture, the isms and supremacies of this world seek either to erode our self-love completely or make it contingent upon their values and their expectations. So to love yourself as who you already are, in the face of a system that fuels itself on you believing and behaving otherwise, that is a radical act of resistance. Further, justice doesn't stop at home. It calls us to our neighbors. It calls us to love our neighbors as ourselves. And it is more or less common knowledge now that the very things that we most hate about our neighbors are far too often connected to the things we most hate about ourselves. In this, a lack of self-love puts a limitation on how much we can love the other, how much we can love our neighbor. It limits our capacity for grounded, effective, and sustainable justice work. That said, there are two more things that I want to say about self-love. First, I want to be perfectly clear that self-love isn't only about giving yourself comfort or pleasure or safety. Yes, sometimes what we most need is comfort. What we most need is a reprieve from this world and the bumps and the bruises that we get while living in it. And when that is what we legitimately need, that is what we should give ourselves. However, self-love just as often calls us out of our comfort zone and into the scariest places of our lives. Because I believe that the life that you have been given is not only your greatest gift, but it is also your greatest charge. You have been given the great gift of this body, mind, and spirit, and the charge to journey with it. To not only nurture it when it is hurt, encourage it when it's downtrodden, but to also compassionately refuse to believe the lie that we tell ourselves when we want to be something smaller than what we truly are. To hold ourselves accountable, not from a place of perfectionism or should-ism, but to look at ourselves with that same fierce compassion that we would offer our child, our best friend, or partner. That fierce compassion that says, I know you're hurt, but I also know who and what you are. And who you are is greater than you could ever imagine. Please, please take that next step. Second, I want to be perfectly clear that self-love is not something that we do by ourselves. Yes, I believe self-love, we bear a primary responsibility for that. But part of loving yourself is letting yourself be loved by others. Part of loving ourselves is asking for help when we need it. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that there is not a single person in this room, even the strongest amongst us, who hasn't found themselves lost and disconnected from their sense of self-worth, who by no power of their own, but instead the power of love, channeled through a friend, family member, partner, or mentor, was reminded of who they are, reminded of their worth and value. It's one of the primary reasons we gather in faith communities, why we gather here at Mount Diablo Unitarian Universalist Church. So if you need a little reminder of your worth and value, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, or Leslie, or Neil, or one of your community members here. It's why we're here. In closing, I want to leave you with a question and a charge. My question is there an area in your life where you could express and experience more self-love? Maybe in the realm of your health, a doctor's appointment you've been putting off, or a change in lifestyle that you know you've been needing to make. Or maybe your spiritual life, that meditation practice or that spiritual practice that you've been putting off for far too long. Or in that area of our lives where we give back to the world. Maybe there's a cause or a class that you've been wanting to join or more fully throw yourself into. Or maybe it's just being kind to yourself in the midst of the triggering events in our world today. Whether it's a call to be gentler or to step out of your comfort zone, my charge for you and for me is that we choose more love today, and we choose it together. Thank you.